Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest In Conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today, we're very pleased to be speaking with Marie Louise Philippe. She is the Senior Sales Director at Airbus, but more importantly, she's the President of the Singapore Chapter of Women in Aviation, which is our topic today. Marie Louise, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, Matthew. Very pleased to be in the show with you today.
First things first, tell us about Women in Aviation. I'm familiar with the organization. It's international in scope. The Singapore chapter officially launched or relaunched, I guess. It was around before a little bit, but that started I think it was the end of March. You're leading the charge for the group. What are your goals for the chapter here?
So you're right, Matthew. It's an international organization, and we have launched our Singapore chapter in March, and we have started the whole preparation work back in last year. So we are now around 35 member organization with endorsement from senior leaders here in the Singaporean ecosystem, aviation aerospace ecosystem. And we also have, during our launch event, we had a very senior representation, not only from the government, but also from the main bodies of the aviation industry, CAS, and we are aiming high with our chapter here in Singapore. Let me first start a little bit talking about why as an organization, international organization, and why we have chosen why as a platform. It gives women who become member, or anyone who becomes a member, an access to 14,000 members worldwide. So it's a very powerful network that you can link into wherever you are in the world. And out of this strong network, we said we want to create a strong network here in Singapore, responding to the needs of this environment in Singapore, and starting by creating our chapter with the aim to create a very strong network between the stakeholders. How do we do that? We need to, of course, build up our membership base. We have seen in only a few weeks, we have grown from literally a handful of people into now almost 40 members. And we see this growth going far beyond these numbers by the end of the year. We are also having set ourselves an agenda of recurrent events that sponsors, members can benefit from. And at the same time, a network is as strong as its commitment to change. And so we will work with the ecosystem to set ourselves ambitious targets in how do we actually achieve that change by promoting more women to be growing in this ecosystem, and at the same time, through STEM activities, attract female students and girls into the industry.
Before you came on the show, when we were talking before, we talked about education being an important part of getting more women in the industry. It's been a struggle, I think, to actually highlight the problem, and it ranges from, it's not just a problem for flight attendants or something like that, but it's on the shop floors at MROs, it's in the C-suites as well. Is the industry doing enough to get more women involved?
So first, I think I wouldn't as per se call it a struggle. I would just say that collectively as an industry, we need to give it a big push. We have seen certainly changes in the past decade or so. I have seen within my 18 years of my career, I've seen changes. But when you look into across the industry, two key indicators always come up fairly quickly. It's when you look at the pilot community, we're still less than 10% across all countries in terms of pilot community. When you look at the C-suite, it's also less than 10% CEOs are women, and there is no obvious reason for this. So we know that diversity will unleash potential for us. Numerous studies have shown that. As an industry, we just need to now take it to the next step, set ourselves ambitions to say, if diversity and inclusiveness are important, how do we actually get there? And this is something where I see that the awareness is now raising across the board, and that's the first step to actually make the change.
Well, it's interesting to me. I mean, if you look at governing bodies like IATA, it's very much a male-dominated board there. I think they've got maybe one or two women that are actually on the board at that level. So, I mean, it needs to start at the top, I think. And we were talking before again in Asian Aviation Magazine in 2019, we did a special section on women in aviation. And I thought, boy, this is going to be great. We're going to get lots of responses. And we really didn't get that good of a response. And I was surprised at that. And I was talking to my publisher, and we sort of came to, my publisher's actually a woman, so got to give her a shout out. But we were talking about this, and we sort of came to the conclusion that people didn't want to highlight the fact that they're really not doing that much. And you and I also talked about, for example, industry conferences. So even though there haven't been conferences for about a year in person, that not enough women are actually on the panels. And so I know that you're trying to change that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think there are great examples today of women in our industry. So why are these voices not enough heard? Maybe that's something we can ask ourselves collectively as an industry. I do see that IATA is taking initiative, though. They have set themselves the 25 ambition, meaning that by 2025 they want to achieve 25% of senior leaders in the industry being female, and that's going across the airline community. In March this year, Malaysia Airlines has subscribed to that ambition. So things are coming along, but again, I insist that we need to do it as an ecosystem. We need to do it collectively. And this is where our chapter will have a great role in how do we get to this collective effort. And what I see is the timing has never been better here in Singapore, because the Singapore government has also put on its own agenda women as a core, and the diversity around the society and the gender balance as a core initiative going forward. And we will be very pleased to support that initiative for our industry here in Singapore. And I think with this support, we will be able to create what has been done in the UK and also starting in the US, which is building up a charter where we clearly define with all the stakeholders what are the ambitions and where do we move and bring the change.
You touched on this a little bit ago, but I think it's interesting, and probably not in a good way. If you ask most people about women in aviation, they think of flight attendants, cabin crew. And they always seem to think that the pilots are middle-aged white men with gray hair, most of the time. It's changing somewhat. We're seeing that here in Asia. I think a year or two ago, there was an entire crew on an Air India flight, if I'm not mistaken, that was entirely made up of women. And we are seeing more women in the cockpit. I think you mentioned a figure not too long ago, 10% or something like that. Are we seeing more women in the captain's seat and the first officer's seat these days?
Step by step. But, the pipeline for pilots is long. To become a first officer or even a captain, it takes very long. And, what we see is unless you change the perception and you come in and do something for girls to see that, oh, no, it doesn't have to be a male pilot, it will not change. So we need to talk to the new generation and let them know that passion for flying doesn't know gender. And what we do here in Singapore is we have a very ambitious goal to have a Girls in Aviation event in September this year, where we will open up to the young generation and letting them know it's fun, it's a great career, and what they can, how they can project themselves and spark the idea in their mind to say, yes, this is for me.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you talk about the new generation because there was an older generation a long time ago, way before my time and your time as well. I mean, there were a lot of famous women in aviation. Amelia Earhart, of course, comes to mind first on everybody's list. But then, I did a little research, and there's a woman named Bessie Coleman, who was the first African American to get an international pilot's license. Catherine Chung, who actually I think was American, but China kind of adopted her as the Amelia Earhart of China. And then a lady named Harriet Quimby, who got her pilot's license 10 years before Amelia Earhart. And Quimby had a quote. She said, "In my opinion, there's no reason why the airplane should not open a fruitful occupation for women." Now, this is back, in the early 1900s, the 1920s, the 1930s. What happened between that time when you had all of these famous women in aviation and then today?
These women were courageous pioneers. And obviously, as an industry, we need to display again that we are pioneers. This is what our industry is about. And of course, in the overall setup, especially in Singapore, young women have a lot of choice how they direct their career. And unless you give them really the visibility that such a career is for them and how exciting it can be, and that there is a real chance to have a long-term and very rich and colorful career, unless you get that into the mind of young girls, then we won't change it. So these STEM activities are extremely important. And when you ask me what my personal view is on why have we not changed enough, I think sometimes if you don't feel the necessity to change, it will not change. I think now we know with studies from McKinsey, every 2 years they do studies. The latest study came out in 2020 about the importance of diversity and how much diverse industries and companies are doing better. And if you compare with the tech industry, I think, yes, there should be no reason why the aviation industry cannot increase its share of women. And from my personal view is we have just not stated enough this necessity to move and to unleash that potential further than we have done so far.
Yeah, I think we need to do that. Marie Louise, we need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're talking with Marie Louise Philippe, the president of the Singapore Chapter of Women in Aviation. Before the break, we were talking about history, famous women in aviation. They were mainly pilots. And we also, I'm trying to read my words here, there were famous women in aviation, not just in the cockpit, but also on the shop floor. Talking about World War II specifically, Rosie the Riveter. These women built thousands of planes that helped win the war. Are we seeing more women on the shop floor at MROs and manufacturers?
So I think, do we see enough? I think there can never be enough. So I'm truly convinced that we can obviously do better. And as I said previously, to do so, we need to engage the young generation, because it's a highly skilled labor. It's a decision of your professional choice you take early. And in my view, we will also see that these jobs are in a transformation. The way we build aircraft back in the Second World War, definitely, but even today, we are moving into more and more digital environment, more and more roboterized environment. So again, I'm making my link to the tech industry. The tech industry has successfully attracted a lot of women, especially here in Asia, like in Singapore, for example. If we can tap into that potential and bring them and connect them into our industry, we have only, there's only gains for us and for these ladies to thrive within this ecosystem.
Well, that was you actually stole my thunder with my next point, because today, instead of grease monkeys, which is an affectionate term I use for mechanics and the like, but we really need what I call code monkeys or computer programmers, because your typical Rolls-Royce engine is when it's in flight, it's sending thousands of data points down. I forget how many gigabytes of data are generated in a typical long-haul flight, but it's a pretty large number. And you don't need a grease monkey to figure that out, to go and look at the engine. You need to look at the computer screen and say, okay, we've got a pressure problem here. This indicates something wrong maybe with a fan blade or whatever. And you're doing data analysis. You're still going to need someone to change the oil, of course, but I would say 90% of the MRO today is doing data analysis, and as you pointed out, there's lots of women in the analytical fields.
Yeah, exactly, and this is where I think our aim, as especially here being in Asia, where we have this great potential, women in aviation, the Singapore chapter is definitely interested to cross-fertilize across these domains. I think today there are two major domains that will influence our industry. That's the digitalization and data, and that's of course sustainability. So we have all interest to attract also mid-career ladies that are in a more data science field to come in and support our industry.
Women in aviation, it's an international phenomenon. Are there regional differences that you see? Is Europe better? Is the U.S. better? And the reason I ask that, I've lived in Asia and worked in Asia since 1989, and I would have thought, okay, Asia, it can be a very paternalistic area, and it might have been lagging, but unscientifically, it seems to me like Asia actually is doing better than maybe some other regions. Is that wrong or right? Or who's doing better when it comes to promoting women in aviation?
For me, it's first and foremost a question of adjusting to the cultural and labor market and the situation, and also education system. Typically in Asia, I concur with what you say, Matthew, is that there are a lot of engineers that are female. So it's a great base to attract then these engineers into our industry. Typically in Europe, the biggest challenge was always to attract female in the first place to do engineering. Here it's more, once they are engineers, become practical engineers, and to foster that move. So I would say overall, I wouldn't say is there anything better or not. I think there are best practices in all regions of the world, in different areas, and we need to again tap into them. And I think, again, if we look into what we want to achieve here in Singapore, is really to ensure that the stakeholders, also the universities, potential schools, the regulator, the government, all pull the strings together to ensure that women have the best environment to grow, thrive through the ranks and lead the sector, as well as see this as a great career. So to finalize on that point, it's really important that we are not pinning it down on one activity, but that it's an ecosystem that agrees that yes, we have potential.
Very, very diplomatic way to put things.
Well, I think, you need to always spin it positive. If you want to change something, my personal conviction is unleash the potential and show people where the benefits are. And the studies are all shown to demonstrate there are benefits. So I think we don't have to hide as women in this industry to show our value. And instead of saying, we things are not going the right way, I think we should say it's there. It's there. Just unleash it.
Well, let me ask you about industry sectors as well. I mean, is there one sector that's doing better? Is business aviation doing better, or OEMs like your employer or your competitor? Are they doing a better job in promoting women, or is it across the entire industry?
I would say generally it's across the industry. I looked a little bit at the statistics. You can still see that whether it's defense or whether it's the commercial sector of aviation, we have potential everywhere. We have seen lately, I found that as an interesting development, that in the defense area, especially in the US, we have seen quite a number of female CEOs, typically previous CEO at Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. So there's been a series of female top execs in that field in one region. Whether that's a general trend, I cannot say. But what I'm saying is, in the end, when you look at the statistics, it's still across all sectors. So we will address Women in Aviation Singapore. We will address all sectors, not just commercial aviation. We'll also include defense and space and general aviation.
Okay. Marie Louise, we're running out of time, so last question. It's been a tough time. Last year was basically a lost year with COVID-19. This year has started off rough. Might pick up in the second half. We don't know in terms of international aviation, things like that. Is there a bright spot that you're looking for with regards to women in aviation, either this year or in the future? What keeps you hopeful about your mission?
I'd say last year was probably the worst point in time to start a networking and association. And despite all, we have seen an incredible amount of energy coming into this project and association. So I'd say the need is there. If the need is there and if people see value of what we're doing, it will grow and it will have its impact here in Singapore. And as I said, I think the endorsement we've received early on from all key stakeholders shows that we're on the right track, and you will see and hear from us a lot as we go along. And important is that we can make sure that the impact is long-term and sustainable, and that next time I'm on the show, you will tell me, indeed, a lot of things have changed for the better.
I hope so. Marie Louise Philippe, President of the Singapore Chapter of Women in Aviation, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you, Matthew.